This video is brought to you by HalloCasa. Our tool transforms independent local real estate agents to global real estate agents. Create your own profile for free and get contacted by international investors. Sign up with the link in the description. Hello and welcome everyone to our 243rd session of HalloCasa. My name is Michael and today I'm talking to Marika Abuashvili from Tbilisi in Georgia. Marika is a leading figure in Georgia's real estate industry. She's currently serves as the chair of the MLS committee at the Georgian National Association of Real Estate, GNARE, and as the chair of the Real Estate Committee and executive board member at the International Chamber of Commerce in Georgia. With over a decade of experience driving international and professional standards, Marika has played a key role in introducing MLS systems, RESO, data standards, and global best practices to the Georgian real estate market. Her work focuses on bridging local markets with international real estate ecosystems, advocating for transparency, data standardization, and professional education within the sector. Marika, thank you so much for your time. I'm really honored to have you on the show. You're not only the first person from Georgia, but also global thought leader in driving global data structure initiatives across not only one ocean, but a couple of continents. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me here. It's a great honor, and I'm excited to talk more about real estate, always eager to do that, and hope to reach across to my peers all around the world about the very important topics. So I am a realtor, broker, and I'm actually wearing many hats in this industry, but they're all related to one theme, which is real estate. And throughout my career, I've been doing all kinds of stuff, starting with marketing and then managing and then brokering and then doing training for real estate agents. So basically, this became part of my life, big part of who I am, actually. Right now, I am in Georgia, but previously, as you mentioned, I lived in Seattle for over 2 decades, and that's where I worked for Coldwell Banker Bain as a managing broker in one of the biggest offices on West Coast, which is in Seattle, Washington, and that gave me actually more experience than I thought I have before I came back to Georgia again. And I returned to Georgia because of family situation. My father was ill and I had to fly here, and a couple of months turned into what now is almost 9 years since I'm back here. So while here in Georgia, of course, real estate being my second nature was provoking a lot of questions. Didn't have much time on my hand in the beginning, but then a very progressive group of people from a local real estate association, which was very small at the time, contacted me. They learned from somewhere that the real estate broker from United States is here in Tbilisi, who is local and speaks all the languages that help with communication and such. And they invited me to discuss a couple of topics with them. And we quickly realized that we can be very helpful for each other. They provided the audience, and that was very important for me because otherwise I would be just here in Georgia for family matters. But all this experience and knowledge and excitement about profession would be dormant for that time being. Georgian Association of Real Estate Professionals gave me an option of share my knowledge, share my expertise, and hopefully help association to promote Western values, Western business ethics, business sort of formula of doing real estate transactions, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and we still working on a lot of things with the association and hoping to do more. But looking back, I can tell you that it's very encouraging to see that I'm not alone in that, and that a lot of people are excited about developing industry and shaping it into something much better. And playing role in that, my small role of a single person, I'm very proud of that, very humble, but very proud at the same time.
For anyone who has no idea about the Georgian real estate market, what is it and also how is it structured? What is the gap there between maybe something in Europe, which is not even perfectly structured?
When I dove into local real estate, as a trainer. That's how I started, and that's actually how I continue here in Georgia. I'm not practicing real estate broker. I don't sell real estate. I work mostly on referrals for that matter, but I do mostly training, coaching, consulting, that type of stuff, and help association with many other things, whichever I can. When I arrived to Georgia and I started getting to know local market and local business habits and basically how it's done here, it started with my very first training. So I thought that I already knew there is no MLS in Georgia. And to me, it was a big no-no because I honestly cannot imagine how any realtor anywhere in the world, including Europe, can work successfully without having that system at their fingertips. We talked about that, and I thought I'll just tell them how it's done in America and how awesome and easy it is. And without any kind of superiority complex, I think that American real estate is recognized to be most successful, and trust me, not perfect in many ways, but very successful real estate formula, very developed and very polished in many aspects of it. So naively, I thought that just a couple of training to my peers, to my colleagues here, will get them ahead, and I'll just show them how it's done, how standardized forms work, how exclusive relationship with the clients, buyers or sellers work, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, you can imagine how it was not so in reality. In reality, what I realized that market is very chaotic, that business transactions are very spontaneous. There is no flow of clients of any kind. There is no exclusivity in relationship between real estate agents and their clients. In fact, clients are considered to be buyers. I imagine this. So when you say client, it's a buyer. The seller is the owner, and it's not a client. So then that was a shocker for me. Of course, both are your clients. If you represent them, that's your client. So a lot of things were surprising for me here. And I also, on a positive side, realized that real estate transaction in the United States, the standard transaction, takes ideally from 30 to 45 days from signing the contract to the finish. In Georgia, you can buy real estate in 3 days. Or two, maybe even in one, because bureaucracy is minimized. Of course, this is due to absence of all the form and all the addendums that go with the real estate contract that protect consumer, protect the realtor, protect the owner, et cetera, all the assurances that American real estate transaction is famous for. But it wasn't here, therefore it was simplified. You just have buyer and seller agree to the terms, sign very short paperwork, a contract, and then you all go to the Department of Justice. There's a registry house, it's called here, and just register a transaction for very minimal fee, and that's it. And if the owner is selling real estate here, I think after 2 years of owning property, they don't even pay sale taxes on the property. Hope I'm not mistaken, but I think that's so. Advantages of buying here are huge, but the transactions itself, there's different ways looking at it. You can look at real estate market in Georgia as investor, local investor, foreign investor, two different things, right? And you can also look at real estate market as a professional, and probably that was my main scope, to look at real estate market here as a professional, at what can I do with sharing my knowledge with local professionals to help them be more successful, be more business oriented, have some kind of a model or brand for their business so that they can grasp more serious clients and not waste their time just running around trying to catch some deal somewhere, because for the most of the time, that's how real estate transactions look here. It's a spontaneous thing.
Now, playing a bit devil's advocate, doing a real estate purchase in 3 days sounds like a goal for many countries. We want to minimize it. So first we want to structure it, we want to implement processes, and then it suddenly takes 3 months or 6 months for the entire process because so many stakeholders involved. And then we find ourselves, hey, wait, let's try to minimize it again. Why break something if it already worked for the Georgian real estate market? So where's there, like, in detail, maybe elements which you definitely think need to be implemented in order to facilitate it? So tell us about maybe also your initiatives you're driving there in order to boost the professionalism and help the agents and each professional making maybe in the end also more money because they feel safer, they know how to conduct business, and they can also have like then potentially a higher throughput. Is that the way you are thinking?
Absolutely, very much makes sense. I can talk about what's lacking in Georgian real estate business model here for days, maybe months, but I'll try to condense it in a couple of sentences here and maybe just concentrate on my own initiatives here that basically are targeting a few main points. I mentioned spontaneity of transactions, right? Or spontaneity of actual agent getting a business, getting leads. This it has completely different personality here. We have offices where brokers have so like a call center almost, where the people just dial and dial, cold calling. American way, it's a cold calling, right? We all familiar with that. So the group of people is sitting there cold calling, and how somehow they get to the lead, and then they try to make it from cold to warm, from warm to hot, etc., etc. But I'm trying to concentrate on a different thing with my trainings, at least in my consultation, that it's important to have a brand. In fact, I think that's where it all starts, because brand is identity. And as much as brand is important for consumers to recognize you, I think while creating your brand, it helps the agent, broker, or a brokerage recognize themselves and identify for themselves what's their formula, what's their type of business, what kind of services they offer, and who is their end client. Because when I started interviewing different companies just to get a grasp on the reality, I realized that almost every company would answer my questions to what is your niche. They would tell me that they do everything. They do land, they do apartments, they do private homes, they do out of town lands and commercial and office rental, everything. And that was a huge wow to me, because in the United States, every agent in the smallest firm represents some kind of a brand, right? At least when we hang our license in brokerages in America, we immediately have to make distinction if we're going to work in residential sector or commercial sector. Sometimes I've seen many agents that are licensed in both, but it's more rare than typical. Here, almost in every office you go, they'll do anything. They will do anything, and they will try to help you, but that's how spread the grip on the market is. So I started with explaining that if you do not have a niche, you basically don't have a business model. So you have to concentrate on something that's very, very your second nature. What do you feel? Let's try to think about it together. And that helped. And I think it resonated really well. And this is just one aspect of that. And then once the agents understood that brand is important, and I've seen already a couple of examples, which makes me super happy, of younger generation real estate agents who adopted those practices, and I see them being successful. This is like the best reward ever. And I see how they're successful because they concentrated on certain areas of real estate sector, and they start working on that, which means they become more knowledgeable about concrete subject. If it's apartment or if it's a neighborhood, whatever niche you are, then you know more about it if you don't have to spread yourself thin and know a little bit about everything instead of the just commonsensical thing I'm saying. But seeing them being successful because they just adopted that one element of successful real estate model was very pleasant to watch. So it's possible. There is reality for this here, and they're eager to do it. Second part, probably most important in real estate communications, business, and etc., is exclusivity. I can talk about brand and exclusive and business management forever, because I think those are like three pillars on which business model should rest, right? In any country. Because without exclusivity, you don't have brand, or without brand, you cannot have exclusivity, because If you don't know, what are you offering to your clients? If your brand isn't developed in that direction, then you cannot be successful in exclusive representation. And simple example, like I usually tell my students, is if you are good at certain neighborhood and you know everything by heart, what is sold there, what parks are there, what businesses are there, what this neighborhood is famous for, when is it formed, where is it geographical area, where is the transport, everything. What is the average price per square meter here for new construction, for older homes? When you start knowing all of that, and when you start publishing this information somewhere there on social media, people will come to you because you will position yourself as an expert. And those are absolutely like 2 times 2 in America, but it's not like that here. That's where I had to start to introduce those concepts, because once we have branding, once we have exclusivity, the next step is standardized contracts. So there is no such mess. They do close fast, but very often there is a aftershock, right? Somebody's unhappy with something because every contract is custom made here, basically. At least every brokerage has its own set of contractual agreements that suits them well, but there is no generalized consumer protection or owner protection or agent protection contracts that I've seen so far. I've seen elements of each in different firms, but I haven't seen like standardized form, what I'm saying. Without standardized forms, without exclusive representation, you cannot have MLS. So here we have it. Those are probably most important 3 things. And another one is business management. You cannot have brand if you don't know how to manage your business, if you don't know and calculate methodically where your income is coming from. Is it Facebook ads? Is it Instagram reels? Or is it like, I don't know, newspaper and internet ads or whatever? How can you calculate and predict your income? And how can you calculate your efforts and where to put your money so you can be more and more successful every year? So those are probably a couple of topics that I mentioned now are basically the topics that we try to go in depth for each of them. And like chicken and egg, actually, they are all very related. We cannot have one without another, but we got to start somewhere.
You mentioned the unstructured sales process. Give us an overview. How does it work if I am an investor, maybe from outside or from Georgia? Normally, in a nutshell, the sales process. What should I expect and maybe also look out for and have some, I don't know, alerts or red flags if this is not happening? And I'm referring to other countries where you have a pre-contract, like a promissory sales contract, where you maybe already have penalties if you don't fulfill anything. I know it from my interviews with people from Portugal. They say that the CPCV, it's called there, it's like the Bible almost. They say it's so important to put so many elements in, and then you put 20% maybe down. If you go back from the contract, you need to pay, I think, like even the double of this down payment towards the seller. Elements like that. How is the right now status quo of the process in Georgia? Or is it just Wild West the way you mentioned it?
I was trying to avoid that term, just not to be snobby American here, but I'm thinking that that probably would describe it really well. We have Wild West without modern Western elements that are actually popping through slowly. And we just need some time, because important thing to understand about Georgia, it has extremely rich history. And just city of Tbilisi itself is 1,500 years old. Imagine that, right? But I'll dive into politics for just a second without offending anybody, I hope. But the, whatever, 75 years of Soviet regime in Georgia did a lot of damage. And why I'm saying that is because there was no private sector here. We're out of that iron grip for maybe 30 years. So there is not really strong network of business schools here, especially for real estate, right? So there is no strong sense of just private businesses here. People are trying to do it by intuition mostly, and my kudos to them, because they are true hardcore entrepreneurs, because they're doing it just by going to Europe, learning something there, just looking at stuff sometimes and trying to bring the best ideas to Georgia and do it that way. And also because of this very early freedom that was available to Georgians in the business sector, there's a lot of things that are undeveloped, and yet I think we should applaud them for sense of entrepreneurship, because 30 years nothing in history, and yet they're stepping on that ground, they're daring, they're trying, they're learning, and a lot of things are not here, but hopefully they will be someday, and it's because of those people that are trying so hard. So what I'm trying to say is that let's compare real estate agent in US, and I know I'm off the topic, I'll return in a second. Real estate agent in US gets their license, they have structured exam, they know what they have to know, it's all in the book, they go and pass the test, then they have to hang their license in brokerage. It's no other way. They cannot just sit there with their phone and sell properties. You can do it in Georgia, by the way. And so it's very regulated. And then the real estate agents in US have all the tools. They have MLS, they have standardized contracts, they have their peers around that are successful. They can teach them a lot of things. They have broker who can probably send them to all kinds of training. Every company, Keller Williams have their own school of thoughts, Remax has its own school of thoughts, Coldwell Banker has their own training, So we have a support system in US. Here in Georgia, Association of Realtors is trying to do the best to become that support system, but it also is very young. But I got to tell you that in all this very few years that they became partners with NAR, and they're attending yearly conferences and learning a lot, et cetera, et cetera. So what I've just wanted to take my time and compliment local real estate professionals for their ability to step on such shaky ground and yet try to make living and business out of that. Now, as far as real estate transaction for investors, there's a couple of good things that are going on. The foreigners can generally purchase non-agricultural land. Of course, the apartments and houses, all of if they're not non-agricultural, so they can do that. And the registration, as I mentioned, is very fast. And as far as residency by investment, purchasing non-agricultural real estate, if you do 100,000, it gives you temporary permit. And if you purchase 300,000 US, then you can have a 5-year investment residency permit, something like that. And it's a path for you to stay in the country. That's what you intend to do. Then another thing is attractive tax regime and attractive tax system. So capital gain exemption, for instance, individuals generally exempt from capital gains on the sale of residential property if they owned it for more than 2 years. So if you sell your property after 2 years, you can pay no taxes. For rentals, if you rent your apartment, investment apartment, I think you pay 5% for your income, right? And a very low annual tax for properties, I think it's 1% of the property value, often zero for different circumstances. I'm not sure how it is for foreign investments, but pretty much property taxes are non-existent. And this is one thing that kills home ownership in America, because taxes, the values of your homes grow rapidly, but so does your taxes. So it's this the catch-22 kind of game. There is a few things that foreign investors should be aware of. Of course, everybody markets themselves, and I don't want to say anything negative, but sometimes it's exaggerated. For instance, the yield on income, on investment rather, in Batumi sometimes is exaggerated. Maybe, I would not tell you the numbers because I don't want to get in trouble, but sometimes maybe a little bit less than it's advertised. So investors should watch for that and just do their research, basically. I think it's true for any country where you're not familiar with, right? If you're investing into a foreign country, you should study the market. I think number one tip from me to foreign investors would be to study economical situation, to study little bit of real estate law, if it exists in the country, to understand what limitations then have, or even better, to get in touch with a skilled professional in that country, which is always helpful. And for Georgia, I would recommend foreign investors to get in touch with members of real estate association here that would be already top professionals in the industry that could help them, and they would guide them through the process about what they need to know, how they need to know, what are good areas or not. Because all of the real estate agents that are members of real estate association, they abide the code of ethics by NAR. It's presented to the real estate community at least twice a year, where they learn and relearn. It's offered for free. So this is basically community rules for associations. So that will be my first recommendation for foreign investors. And then I can maybe share on the screen, just as a little bonus for somebody who is interested in investing in Georgia beforehand, they can study this table that I've been working on for some different paper, but I share it on screen, and then you can take it. I don't mind, and maybe share it with whoever is interested, about different neighborhoods and their personalities, because there are different neighborhoods of the city that represent different type of investment. Is it a short-term investment, or is it long-term, or is it premium and luxury, or is it like family focused for resale, et cetera, et cetera. So we can do that. And also, as far as recommendation to foreign investor, there is a lot of information and statistics offered through International Chamber of Commerce, which I'm on the board of directors with. And we constantly publish researches that would be very useful for an investor. So all they need to do is Google us and or connect with us directly by phone, and all the information that we possess will be presented to them, so they can make intelligent decisions about invest or not invest, or where to invest in Georgia.
Absolutely. Sounds perfect. Thank you so much for this background information also regarding the Chamber of Commerce. And yes, let's jump into the neighborhoods. I'm always curious to talk to local experts to really understand like the distinctions of luxury neighborhoods, maybe upcoming neighborhoods, something which is not even developed yet, short-term rentals. So yeah, give us an overview there maybe, and also guide us through those neighborhoods.
So this is the screen that anybody who is interested in investing probably could capture it. And of course, this is very generalized, but you can tell already by this screen how different the neighborhoods are in Tbilisi, even though it's a very small city, but like I told you, it's a very old city, and it has tremendous amount of personality. And of course, there's new development, there's newer neighborhoods that are developed, and all of them have their own personality. So this is basically, in short, what could be happening here. Like the most popular for short-term rentals in Tbilisi, Georgia, is of course Tadzminda and Old Tbilisi region. It's a historic area, absolutely flooded with tourists, with a lot of charming cafes, restaurants, a lot of history, a lot of architectural points that are very interested, a lot of churches and that are very old. One of the oldest churches is Basilica that was built in 4000, and it's a heavily visited by tourists, of course, and religious or not, doesn't matter, but it's functional. So that's very interesting. And there's a lot of churches of different denominations, of course, in Georgia. There's in one area of the very center of Tbilisi is probably 80, maybe more churches in one, and they're blended perfectly in the architecture of the city. So that's old city. And then you see the yield here. I would not put my name on the percentage because it's a very strange thing when you start predicting income, but this is what statistical research says, and that's what I put here. Sabotalo is an old new neighborhood, right? We can say that is also very popular because its proximity to subways, proximity to transport, because of a couple of colleges being in that neighborhood, and because of bigger roads and malls and those kind of structures. And since it's newer neighborhood, they just simply had the land to put those structures on. Where in an old city, like any old city in Europe as well. They have a tiny little streets and houses that cannot be torn down. It just has historical value. And then is most desirable neighborhood, considered to be most prestigious, with mostly residential buildings, a couple of university buildings, and beautiful businesses all around, some restaurants as well. But for some reason, I don't know for what reason, but it's considered to be a prime neighborhood in Tbilisi. And because of that, it's heavily desired, very desired, and heavily populated, rather, I would like to say. And everything rents perfectly fast in this neighborhood. And builders are being very creative in terms of inventing a place to put their new construction in. And unfortunately, for me personally, unfortunately, I know it's a natural process for every city, but a lot of older, let's say 3-4 story buildings are torn down, and the huge new 16-story residential buildings are put in. It creates a lot of traffic. Traffic is a huge problem in Tbilisi right now, especially in Vake, because of some traffic restrictions. But everybody who comes to Tbilisi first tries to buy something in Vake, and then they explore their other options. And then more family focused, more affordable neighborhoods are the ones that are listed here. It's Diko, Isani, or Tachala. I would add Guldani here, which is a very, very colorful, very dynamic neighborhood. They have everything there. It's like another city you can live in. Without living it, you can have everything there. And the prices there are much lower, but demand is very high. So those are just very brief overview, of course, of a couple of different neighborhoods here. As far as outside Tbilisi, we have Batumi, which is a city on the Black Sea, which is even older than Tbilisi. I think it's about 2,400 years old. It's the oldest port of Georgia. It has a huge historic background. It has an amazing botanical garden that was built in, I think, by French entrepreneurs in 1800s. And it's just becoming huge because it's the endless seashore that gives you the opportunity to extend a boulevard from the main one. It used to be 9 kilometers. I think it's much more than that now. And so you see a lot of new constructions, a lot of 20, 24-story buildings there. And of course, there's a lot of buildings that are being offered for sale. There are a lot of choices, and the lower price range, higher price range penthouses and such, like it would be in any seashore. But demand is also high. We see a lot of tourists and a lot of investors that buy maybe whole blocks in the buildings and then have them managed for rent for tourist season, etc.
Regarding Airbnb, is there any restrictions anticipated in Tbilisi or in Georgia overall?
No, I'm not familiar with any because we are both using Airbnb when we have guests coming from Europe or US. They all stay in Airbnb and very happy about that. And I also helped a couple of my friends establish their profiles on Airbnb to rent out their investment properties locally, and we never had any problems with that, actually. But what foreign investors do, the ones that are not living in Georgia, they are hiring manager from local population, somebody who can just run that business for them and get percentage of income from there.
Georgia is obviously located next to Russia. What's there the touch points with Russia? Maybe legally, people moving there. You have then a little bit like down, let me put it that way, like Dubai. Maybe you have an interesting dynamic there, because if you also tell me about those interesting yields and investment, and I compare that even to, in my head, to a little bit like Dubai. If I'm a rich Russian, the first destination I feel Russians have is going to Dubai and investing there. There's a lot of Russians, rich Russians. But then you can maybe even say, like, why would I go to Russia? Georgia offers me nicer yields and is not that saturated. I'm just thinking out loud here. Is there anything happening where you feel like there's some influx coming from Russia?
Well, absolutely. It cannot be any other way considering all the geopolitical situation that Georgia is in and considering current unfortunate events of Russian-Ukrainian war that basically created a huge influx of Russian population into Georgia. And for obvious reasons, avoiding the draft or just disagreeing with politics or whatnot. It could be a whole bunch of different reasons, but it's a warm country, it's a sunny country, there's a lot of fruits and vegetables. Trust me, that makes sense. I will tell you one funny thing. I was asking this one Russian girl that she was very young on the street selling something. I don't remember what it was. And I asked her, like, what brings you? Are you going to stay here? Are you going to be here temporary? And she said that I came here to stay. And I said, what motivated you to do? She says, tomatoes. And she said, I never had more tastier tomatoes in my life. So I'm going to stay here and eat tomatoes. Of course, it's half humorous, but what I'm saying is that I lived in Russia twice in my life, 5 years each time. So I'm quite familiar with the culture and environment, and fruits and vegetables and sun is something that's in big deficit in big regions of Russia, right? So that's very attractive environment to be in. Russians always loved to visit Georgia, and some of them loved to call it their own, unfortunately. But because of the current political events, because of the war, the huge amount of Russians came into Georgia, just huge, especially right after, like hundreds of thousands. And Georgia is a very small country. Our own population is not even reaching 3 million. So imagine it's, so there was some critical concerns were raised. There's one part of the population in Georgia were completely against it. Another was super welcoming. So there's division there in opinions. But as far as real estate market, what happened is Georgians sense that Russian tenant is richer than Georgian tenant. The rental prices went up, and then the residential sale prices went up. In those year and a half, they just skyrocketed. And now you see that students, for instance, that come from province to study in the university, they could no longer afford the rent because the owners of the properties much rather rented to those foreigners and for higher yield than give it to students. It wasn't exactly patriotic, but I guess that's human nature, right? That's business. So there was a lot of concerns, and this is just one example, students. There's a lot of other issues where too. But then this population starting to go to Dubai, Turkey, and other countries. Less of them stayed here. Still a huge amount of Russians living now in Georgia because I think they registered 100,000 business licenses here. So they bought businesses, they build businesses. You see it when you go on the street, like Russian speaking businesses everywhere now, which wasn't so even in Soviet times when the Russian influence was very strong. But going back to real estate sector, what happened is this memory of higher prices created the effect of owners living in a dreamland. And now what happens is they are trying to rent or sell their properties for this imaginary prices 2 years ago, which we all know, who is in real estate for quite a long time, that you almost have to measure real estate market temperature on daily basis. You cannot have some kind of stereotype in your head and live with that. So that was hurting a lot of transactions. It would limit the inventory quite a bit because the owners would be just sitting on it until they would get that perfect foreign tenant or foreign buyer. But I think this tendency is dissipating a little bit through common sense, through education, through studying news, et cetera, et cetera. But that was big. And then another thing for real estate market, there is a belief in real estate community that Russian brokerages are a little bit stronger as far as marketing, branding techniques, and all of that. So they came into the Georgian market as a competition to local brokers. And that was very concerning for local communities, even though you can view it as challenge and healthy competition to speed up their game and step up with their skills. Those are the type of opinions and type of influences that were caused by trying to avoid political views. But as far as real estate goes, those were a couple of highlight points that I wanted to bring as far as Russian population influx to Georgia.
Moving to another topic, the Georgian National Association of Realtors. You have been leading the MLS committee there. Give us maybe just first and foremost an overview of the association in Georgia. What's the status, what's the situation, and also your initiatives there. You already touched upon those regarding the training, I know, but what can we imagine there right now, the status of the National Association of Realtors in Georgia?
In development of organizations, especially in such new industry as real estate profession in Georgia, we talked about only 30 years of private sector being developed here. I think association did quite well. Of course, being Georgian and being passionate person, as many of my colleagues, we want to accomplish much more and much faster. That's probably the only problem. But when I joined the association as a member of the board in 2017, I was elected twice for the board of directors and association. And so I have at least 4 years of experience as a board member, and then the rest is as a trainer. I can tell you that when I came to association, we had 25 member companies, not the brokers, companies. And right now, only 7 years later, we probably have about, I don't know the latest number, unfortunately, but I think maybe 150 or close to it. And we're talking about companies, and each company has probably between 3 and 25 realtors in it, because the membership of the local association is based on companies, not the individual licensees, right? I think in this short period of time, considering, a lot of things were accomplished, actually. I remember teaching the very first code of ethics by NAR that was translated to Georgian language, and it was a time of COVID. And my very first training was on Zoom, by the way. I have to mention it because nobody knew what Zoom is at that time. But I think the very first training was what Zoom is. And once we figured that out, then we actually did so much more during the COVID time than on the average time because of the easy access. So code of ethics, the first code of ethics was taught in Georgian language and then in English language for our foreign member companies, and that was adopted at that time. So I think that was huge because Golden Rule was an eye-opener for many, and not eye-opener because of the context, but because of how simple and understandable it is. That's all they had to know. That opened the door for many different questions and many different discussions and became one of the favorite topics. In 2018, I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier, Georgian Association of Real Estate became partner member of NAR, which opened a huge amount of doors to international communication, to actual professional partnerships, and to just human friendships, which was very important. And the outpour of support and dedication to developing real estate in Georgia from our side was amazing to see. And we have a lot of friends there. We have trainers that are coming from US to teach our established brokers on how to manage their business and how to make it successful. And we have several master classes and such. And the goal of association is to continue to provide all the resources, educational, statistical, or whatnot, to continue to raise the level of professionalism for local agents. That's one thing. And another thing is that there's a human element. I think that's something that association succeeded in tremendously, which is from mistrust and isolation of members of association, they became friends, colleagues, and develop an amazing local network of professionals. Imagine, it's like, you remember we mentioned the Wild West before, and so everyone themselves, Now, when you see transaction being conducted by two members of association that absolutely trust each other, they enjoy working with each other, their clients enjoy working with each other, I think that's huge. They also create a lot of educational session, and they create get-togethers almost on a bi-monthly basis where people just get together, they talk about things, they talk about their listings, they talk about their families. So they keep expanding this wonderful real estate community of professionals. And I think this is probably one of the biggest accomplishments. Another accomplishment is, I think what association had managed in the past years is to actually bring developers into association and put those relationships together, developers, builders of new constructions, and agents who help them sell those properties. That was an important step because I don't think there's any sector of real estate should be separated from real estate agent community. I think it doesn't help anybody, especially the owners of the properties, would it be builder or otherwise. So that's basically what we are doing. And then also the project it's not on the back burner, but it's slow in development, but it's probably most important, is the licensing of real estate agents. This is a very interesting project. I took part in the educational segment of it, but what we're trying to do is work with government on creating a licensing system for the agent. First, so the agent could be accounted for. Second, so there should be game rules for everybody that are the same. And also, if the agents are not playing, there could be some kind of consequence, anything. And in very many cases, when somebody unprofessionally conducts their services, it tarnishes the reputation of the rest of the agents in the country, which I'm sure a lot of European, especially relate to very much. The reputation of the real estate brokers sometimes is not the best. So we're trying to improve the reputation by having regulated business model here. And for that, and I'll go back to educational session, we created and I authored a couple of courses and a licensing course. So we decided if we do licensing course for real estate agents and we practice it and polish it and it becomes perfect, and then we can go to the government agencies and say, hey, listen, we developed this licensing course. We know exactly what we need our agents to do, what's the code of ethics and everything, and can you help us make it legal? And I think that would be a better way to do it than just do nothing and expect from the government to one day regulate this sector. And then you can end up with a bunch of unnecessary crazy rules in Eastern Europe that actually fell victim to that course of action, waiting for the government to impose rules on them, not the other way around.
Marika, thank you so much for this in-depth conversation and all the information you have shared today. You guided us through an amazing journey of your experience and professional life, your journey to Washington, why you initially moved back to Georgia out of family purposes and stayed there and started to implement certain MLS standards. You gave us a good overview of the status of the real estate market in Georgia. You also mentioned that, for example, there's some differences, basic differences, such as clients are buyers and not the sellers, and how you can purchase real estate in 3 days, which, however, doesn't give like higher security and comply to the best professionalism and the best standards. You mentioned the Department of Justice, also the real estate professional elements regarding training from cold calling in a very transactional way to building brand and making sure that people perceive you in a very targeted light, that you are being recognized as maybe a thought leader or an expert in your niche, and implementing and bringing certain best practices from the US, such as the training, the branding, the exclusivity, and also the business management processes to Georgia, and make sure that you train the brokers and the agents there. You also gave us a very nice overview regarding the sales process and also the maybe lack of promissory sales contracts and elements, which are in a way like inherent from the Soviet time, and you mentioned a couple of times the 30, 35 years that basically there's a lot of newness in the entire industry. You also gave us a nice overview regarding the tax exemptions and the interesting destination of Georgia in terms of real estate investments, and gave us tips for investors, why invest, and also where invest regarding the neighborhoods and the distinction between the neighborhoods, and also with a grain of salt regarding the potential return on investments for each neighborhoods and also the method of investing. You then finally gave us a very nice, interesting overview regarding the association of the Georgian Real Estate Association of Real Estate Agents and the profession and the trend and your hope for the future, which I really appreciate. Apart from all these elements, is there anything else you would like to share with the audience which we haven't touched upon?
I'm very hopeful, and I think that community of real estate professionals that are passionate about what they do is what will change things in Georgia or any other country, because traveling through different forums and conferences, I see a lot of similarities. In fact, an MLS forum, that was one of the interesting topics. What are the similarities across the board as far as adopting MLS? And MLS is not just one thing, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of approaching real estate. And I think once we turn this stone, then the future is limitless. I think that in countries with emerging economies, the human element is very important. And I think those are the people that carry the enthusiasm during the conversations with my colleagues here in Georgia. When I talk about the best practices, the best models, the best ways to approach the real estate transactions, the best way of servicing clients and whatnot, all those topics, I'm them about American way of real estate seems unrealistic to them, and rightfully. And sometimes I hear this opinion that, you know what, it works in America, it really wouldn't work here. And I'm sure there's something like that going on in Romania and I don't know, Poland, Italy, and all that, right? Where they do not have necessarily the same model as we do in US. And I always address this argument. And when I start my trainings about branding, it would be or anything else, I'm saying to my students that 100 years ago, real estate in the United States wasn't as it is now. It was not. There was a lot of fraud. There was a lot of scam. There was no code of ethics. There was all this stuff that we model real estate through 100 years of its development, maybe 108 to be exact, then we can do it also. And most importantly, we have an excellent model to learn from that would work most organically in the local environment and the local culture. But we already have sort of bicycle invented, we don't have to reinvent it. So one thing I want to say is that progress and reforms and any kind of improvements are always carried by optimists and enthusiasts. Same goes for real estate community in Georgia or elsewhere. And I just would like to say that I appreciate all the people that are involved in this process, including yourself, because what you're doing is you spread more, you're attracting the knowledge and excellent people all over the world, putting it in your channel. And I think this is one of those things that I would like to thank you for, to put people together, put ideas together, to put minds together, to make this profession better for everybody else who is involved. Association and the associations created for that very thing, to combine all the progressive thoughts, to get together all the people that have optimistic and encouraging views. Association is the place where people with optimism and enthusiasm are gathered to help the rest of the people that could be maybe more skeptical get advantage of the common knowledge that bring best practices from all over the world into countries. That's probably how it's done in many other countries. So I just want to thank everybody who's involved in the process, everybody who made me part of the process and let me share my expertise. And of course, thank you for bringing me to your show and letting me talk about Georgia and what's happening here, and maybe sharing a few thoughts with you and others that might be helpful in some way in future.
Thank you so much, Marika. I'm only asking some questions. You are the one with the expertise. So it's beautiful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for also articulating all your experiences and your thoughts and ideas. And it's also, to be super honest, beautiful to see that even though we are like in the age of AI and data and everything automated, I feel it's beautiful that it's still like a business and an industry which is driven by people like you who see a gap and who say, okay, I'm not just accepting the status quo, but I'm changing it. And there's a lot of human effort still needed to talk to the right stakeholders locally to drive initiatives. And sometimes I think we believe that everything is already done and we will be run by machines. But in the end, it's beautiful that we see like people like you exactly driving those initiatives. Having said that, in case anyone is listening to this and would like to talk to you and reach out to you, how can they reach out to you? What is the best method of communication with you?
Any method, I'll be happy to share my email with you. I have WhatsApp, I have Viber and FaceTime, Facebook Messenger. I'm available on all the technologies. And please, by any means, if anybody wants to reach out and talk to me or get directions on how to get further, I'm here to help.
Thank you so much, Marika. I'm sending the best regards to Georgia, and it was a pleasure to talking to you. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. You too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
This video is brought to you by HalloCasa. Our tool transforms independent local real estate agents to global real estate agents. Create your own profile for free and get contacted by international investors. Sign up with the link in the description.